Well, Kevin, can you believe that? Gosh, it's been since I guess January that we've actually started these podcasts. And I think you said maybe as early as the end of December last time. So I thought it would be a good time for us to kind of reflect a little bit on what we've been doing as the Aerospace and Innovation Academy, how our students have continued to kind of be provided these unique opportunities and how they can take advantage of those still. And just to kind of give our listening audience some things to expect that are coming down the pike. So let's touch base a little bit about some of the things that our students have been doing in that amount of time. Obviously, post-COVID, we've run into several issues the way most people have. And of course, we're seeing that resurgent now with Delta. So it's kind of kept us from maybe, meeting in person the way that we've wanted to. But we seem to have kind of pivoted in a way because of that, that's opened up more opportunities. Can you talk a little bit about some of the conference papers that our students have been writing in this amount of time?
Absolutely. Let's see, in 2021, we had 6 student teams that prepared presentations and technical papers that were accepted at the GLEX, which is a Global Space Exploration Conference, and it's held in St. Petersburg, Russia. So that was a big deal. We would have really enjoyed going there. Apparently, Russia, it's great. That's a great time of year to visit. But with, the pandemic, that's a real crowd.
Well, I remember, that was the first one on our list. And then we even had COSPAR, which was in Australia. And then, we were looking forward to that. That got delayed and I believe has been further delayed into 2022.
Absolutely. We had 7 student papers and we would have presented those live. We did not make recordings for those. And that event has been pushed into 2022 now. Which is fine because we're hoping, eventually we'll get a chance to take students there, wherever they do the work, let's take them to present.
Right. Well, and recently, I think in addition to hearing about our Dubai trip, which is coming up, and I know you can share a little bit about that as well. I think we got 100% of our students accepted to this new conference that we're doing, the Hawaiian International Conference on Education. Is that correct?
Yes, the HICE conference. You're absolutely correct. Hawaii International Conference on Education. So we submitted 9 abstracts. The students did. And for our listeners, Ms. C often, she works with our students on their writing and their speaking. And we find that that is just a great combination of some technical knowledge and then being a great communicator. But that conference is scheduled for early January on the Big Island of Hawaii, which is the island that you see the active volcano on. And we are also collaborating with a school on that island that those students are going to be mentoring some of our Wolfpack team on some space settlement contests. And our aim right now is to conduct a high altitude balloon using the Global Star radios while we are there in Hawaii. So hopefully we'll get some great imagery of our high altitude balloon as it ascends over Hawaii.
And I know that you touched base a little bit about the idea of the editing and the talking parts of the papers, but I thought we might, for anybody who's out there going, how are these kids writing these level papers? Or is it just for kids? And actually, it's not. These are university conferences that these students are preparing for. Let's talk a little bit about how we encourage middle school students and how we build them in that process. How do you help them with their topics? Let's start with topic selection first.
Well, if you want to go back to the motivation for the students, at our first school when we met, I was starting a satellite team, a CubeSat team, and we needed to go to conferences to meet professionals in industry, in academia, and military, at NASA, and even government. And to do that, writing a paper is often a great way. So the fact that we were going to travel to some conferences really motivated the kids to wanted to get, it really motivated them to want to get their papers accepted. So they were motivated because they had an opportunity to travel and to do something that was very unique for their age.
So with the topic selections, it's usually kind of a broad range for these conferences. How do you help students come up with something like, for example, the IAC, right? Let's use that because
Right.
that's the one you've attended most often.
Sure. We had two young ladies that went to Bremen, Germany, that were on a paper written by one of our contractors for our first satellite in 2018. And then in 2019, we had a paper selected that was literally written by a seventh grader and a handful of sixth graders. And so we went and actually presented that live for the first time in Washington, D.C. The conference, the International Astronautical Congress moves around worldwide year to year. But in answer to your question about how do we choose topics, the first thing is when you look at a conference, we look at the sessions, and then it really is, where do the students want to write a paper? If we can help point them and say, hey, here are the categories. At IAC, for instance, it's a massive worldwide, probably folks from 80 nations or more that attend, but they actually within the Astronautical Congress had a session on history. So we actually had a student that wrote a history paper about advances in, for instance, astronomy in the Middle East. His paper was accepted right there along with other students who wrote papers on satellites they're either building or hope to build.
Right. So it goes through the topic selection, and then usually the first thing is that we kind of submit these abstracts, right? And so I've had the privilege of working with some of the students on that, and some of the lessons that I think that we've learned that we seem to be getting better in this process in general is really paying attention to some of the fine details. Each conference seems to be a little bit different, but also just working with kids who are willing to be told this isn't ready yet. We have to keep editing. And it does go through a lot of edits. And so I know that some listeners who might be thinking, how are you getting middle school kids to write like this? It really is a lot of iterations, right?
Absolutely. And what I would say is, when you start out, there's a lot of enthusiasm on the side of on the students or with the students, but what they often think is the task is what I would call a middle school book report or a middle school survey of a topic.
Right.
So the hardest part is elevating their game to look at the format. And I think imitation is a great way to teach certain task, right?
Mm-hmm.
So technical writing, if you can show them some well-written papers, some papers that were accepted in the past, and say, here's the standard, this is what we have to meet. I think that is a good way to help them see by giving them exemplars.
And I think too that by breaking it down into manageable parts, I know that that's one thing that I think that's helped keep even my paper writing on track, is to be able to say, by this date, we're going to have this part done by this date. So I think it helps students to realize that larger tasks are more easily accomplished when you break them down. I mean, we say it all the time, but it's actually almost having to help them figure out how to break it into those parts.
I also think that at this age, young people need all the practice they can get at project management sort of skills, and breaking a larger activity into sequenced and digestible pieces, that just sets them up for their best chance to win.
As an educator too, I think one of the biggest benefits that I see from the students writing these papers, short of the fact that they're traveling and presenting, is really the research aspect. Learning that we don't already have the knowledge just there in our brains, that we actually have to read and then take some notes. And from that, we might then learn about the theories that are associated with whatever aspect of the paper it is that we're writing. I think that was at first the initial challenge that students had, and they didn't even understand what theory meant or what it had to do with these conferences. But even it made me not even a better teacher, but even a better writer from having to go back. And it's almost like revisiting what we did in college with that.
Right.
So I know that we have some other things that we have continued to do since that time, and the papers being a big one, and we'll, I'm sure, have some updates maybe live from some of these conferences when we go. But let's talk a little bit about our advocacy efforts. We've had some podcasts in the past. We actually have done a session with Dale Ketchum of Space Florida. We've also talked with Congressman Brian Mast on this podcast about some legislative advocacy that he had done with our students. We've talked to several students who've been involved in the teams, but it changed a little bit, obviously, from this year. Last year was the last time we were able to go in person, if I'm
2 years ago.
Was it 2 years? I see that's that COVID time drain that changes. But
I take that back. We did go to Tallahassee in 2020.
We did it because it was earlier. It was right before things shut down. And I believe we were in DC too, because we kind of had that standing joke when one of the students was sick. We're like, so the COVID time channels, right? But things had to change up this year. So tell us a little bit, since you are the Florida State captain for some of our legislative efforts, what we had to do since we started this podcast to kind of make it up and running.
Well, first of all, there's two major advocacy efforts that we engage in. The first is a state level effort that is called Florida Space Day. And that is really about industries and companies coming together one day a year to go and advocate on behalf of legislative priorities or just flat out asks for the legislature. Now, because Shauna and I have both the Aerospace and Innovation Academy, which is a company, and I have my CubeSat company, which is called Blue Cube Aerospace, I participate in that effort through my companies. But what we use that access to is to provide and to create student teams. So we had 3 student teams that called on Tallahassee this year, and we were 3 of probably 15 teams or so, it seems like, and we were all given colors as our team names. So I think there were 15 teams fanned out across the state, mostly industry folks, a few college students, and then we had our 3 middle/high school teams. And we had some generic talking points. You're really not there to push your own company. It's just things that are good for the state of Florida with respect to the aerospace industry.
Isn't this the first time too that you actually had students lead the teams who actually were responsible? There were student team leads who did the training and things like that.
That is a big difference. Since about 2011, I got involved with different advocacy on Capitol Hill at the federal level, and having moved back to Florida in 2016, I got involved with Space Florida. Now we're at a point where Shauna and I don't have to do all the training of the students, because we've had some wonderful kids that move through our pipeline that are now high school, and some are now heading off to universities, and they are really good at training the middle school kids. So one of the philosophies that we employ is mentoring, right? A heavy reliance on mentoring, where you work your way through our system, and then once you're the older kid, it's your job to train those that come behind you. And I think the young kids enjoy it. The older students really seem to enjoy it as well.
I think they did a great job leading. I mean, I was rather impressed. It was really from those efforts that we decided we kind of need to let them do that more often. And so we came up with the idea of having a course. So those same students this summer spent some time with both you and me building a class in Thinkific. And so we created our first online course for advocacy training, essentially, that we're going to be able to use this year, so that as we've grown and we have, it's one of the great updates that we have several students, not just with whom we work face to face here in the state of Florida, but around the country. So those students may well be able to attend some of these sessions and get training in a way that we used to have to do it in a classroom. But now we've been
absolutely. Pre-COVID, almost all of the aerospace and advocacy that we did was confined to just the students in our classrooms. But necessity breeds invention, right? And so with COVID, we took the Wolfpack, we created the Wolfpack CubeSat development team. It was entirely online. It was completely separated from the school we were at. And now we're able to pick up students in our space clubs and our other outreach, advocacy, aerospace, CubeSat endeavors from all over. We have a young lady named Sachita. She's outside Philly. She joins us. We have Preston in Illinois. We have some students from Hawaii who join us. We have
Jesse in North Carolina.
We have a faculty member from one of the tribal colleges at Salish Kootenai in Montana, and he's spoken with our kids. So we literally, we'll take it worldwide if we can, but we're definitely entertaining kids and working with students from around the country.
It's a good segue into talking about some of the classes. It was in January of this year that we did our first virtual space club. Since then, we're now in the second iteration. We have a face-to-face and a virtual one for that. And you also had some summer sessions as well as these fall sessions. So let's talk a little bit about how the Aerospace and Innovation Academy is taking these virtual clubs as ways to provide opportunities for students.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the summer first. We did three. Sure. I don't know if you would call them camps, or I like to think of them as workshops.
I like them as boot camps. It makes it sound like, I got to get exercise. It's a good reminder.
I definitely think of them as sort of like a workshop where they're learning to do things, not just being entertained or just sitting and listening. But the first one was strategies for science fair success. So for our listeners that don't know, I have enjoyed a really good amount of success at the Palm Beach Regional Science and Engineering Fair with about 150 students in the last 6 years. We have a very high percentage of kids that place and a really large number of kids that go on to the state science fair. We have had a couple of state champs and a couple of grand champions. And I'm always very excited to see the kids go from I just don't know to this is a great question to conducting a good experiment and then moving on. So the first summer camp was strategies for science fair success. Be on the lookout because we're putting some of that content together that'll be available online so that if you can't be there live for our workshop, you can still get the advantage of the tips and the suggestions and really it's about learning the process of how to go from oh goodness, we have to start and I'm a parent and I don't want to do my kid's science fair project to achieving your best possible outcome.
One of our recent podcasts was with Jennifer Davis, the science fair coordinator, and learned a lot there as well. So you can certainly revisit some of our former podcasts as well.
I think that was episode 24, 25.
Yeah,
20. Yep. And then real quickly, we did two other workshops this summer. One was Introduction to Orbital Mechanics. One of my favorite topics to teach to students. We always move from an area that students know real well, say roller coasters or pendulums or going up and down hills on a skateboard, to how do satellites move? How do the moons move around the planets? How does a planet move around its star? And then how to manipulate that and how do you maneuver in space? Remarkably fun stuff. So that was one week. And then there was another week, CubeSat mission planning. Very exciting time. I have young students that are very, just really fired up about their opportunity, their chance to try to create a satellite proposal that NASA will accept.
And speaking of those, I want to come back to that in a second, but I don't want to forget about the fall classes that are offering now. This is the first time that we've been doing a face-to-face and virtual space club since we began in January. But you're also offering, since you mentioned science fair, you're offering science fair support. So any of our listeners who are interested in getting into the science fair or maybe getting their students into, how can they contact you to find out more about what you're saying with these materials and et cetera?
Sure. I think one of the easiest things to do is to point you to our website, aerospacehigh.org. You may also reach out to us by email. Would you like to give them yours or mine?
Yeah, you should give them yours to contact you about that, for sure.
If you want to know specifically about the science fair sort of prep classes or strategies for science fair success, please reach out to me at ksimmons@bluecubesat.com.
I'll put the link in the description as well so that they can reach out to one of us there.
Wonderful. I'm a visual learner.
You're gonna write it down?
I'm gonna write it down, but ksimmons@bluecubesat.com. Most science fairs, they began at the school level and then they move to a regional level and then to a state level. And that's the case in Palm Beach County. We have a very large, well-organized fair led by a lady, Miss Jennifer Davis. As Miss Shauna told you, here's the link. Here's my email. bluecubesat.com, Command-Shift-3 for all you Mac users.
Of
You can
course, since
screenshot
this is a
that.
podcast, it'll be interesting to see how many people are
Oh,
able to
wow.
see your index card.
Well,
No worries. I'm going to put
for
it in
our
the
podcast listeners, we also post our videos of our podcasts on our YouTube channel. You can look us up at Aerospace and Innovation Academy, the YouTube channel.
I'm going to pop back a little bit now, though. You had mentioned the idea of these proposals that you continue to write. And of course, that's one of your areas of specialty. Is you were really the primary reason why the middle school was able to be the first middle school to launch a CubeSat. There's others down the pike. And so that's how students actually do the real hands-on. It's one of the best opportunities that perhaps the Aerospace and Innovation Academy offers. You mentioned one of the things I know you have coming up that students who are part of our program will be participating in is what's known as this PDR. Can you tell us a little bit about what a PDR is and,
Sure.
and what that is coming or when that's
Sure.
coming?
For those of you that aren't in, say, engineering fields or heavy STEM fields, the PDR is a preliminary design review. It is simply one of the gates or the processes that you go through in your engineering project life cycle, the timeline for your project. And the preliminary design review is a requirement by NASA that we get both a technical review and a merit review of our proposed ideas before we submit that CubeSat proposal to them, which is normally late November or early December.
Great. Well, so essentially, in addition to working with students, we've also worked with teachers. So we'll give that little update. We were very excited. We had been trying to kind of get this grant that we had undertaken back in 2018 now.
It's been a couple of years.
Right. And we still had this kind of money that we needed to share with these teachers. And it's been a tough time coming trying to get together with COVID. But our last time around, we were able to meet with, I guess it was about 8 teachers, some as far as Miami coming up. So I was really excited to meet some of those teachers who are also looking to do the real work of aerospace in their class. And I think that's a good segue into our last discussion about how we can kind of create the we call them, teacher entrepreneurs. There's this new term for it, is edupreneurs now. So tell us a little bit about that and how we had hoped it would culminate with this high altitude balloon launch, and we're kind of still waiting on that. So tell us a little bit about entrepreneurship for teachers.
Well, first of all, prior to returning to Florida and moving specifically to South Florida, I was at the National Science Foundation for 6 years. And there I worked in the engineering directorate in the division that specifically was assigned the responsibility for encouraging entrepreneurship and innovation. The name of the division was Industrial Innovation and Partnerships. So I really got a great appreciation, and I traveled to a lot of universities and met with a lot of company folks over those 6 years about the importance of innovation, starting companies, and what's unique about the startup culture in our country versus other countries, especially say Japan or China, and how we actually use failure as a learning process. We don't punish our serial, entrepreneurs for starting a company that doesn't succeed. And I see that as a great learning, a great technique to motivate students, especially when they are taught to find a problem, to create a solution, to capture their IP, et cetera. And they can do great societal good. So I'm coming to South Florida with 2 sort of drivers for myself. One, can very young students, middle school students, build a real satellite? And number 2, how do we weave in as much entrepreneurial thinking into our classrooms and our young people? And I can't minimize it enough. Being a great communicator is an important part of being an entrepreneur.
Well, before you go on, I want to kind of stress the idea that that's where that whole blue sky philosophy, for which this podcast is kind of named, the idea of blue sky learning, kind of stemmed from, right? Was that
Absolutely.
kind of starry-eyed ideals that you had that these young kids don't know they can't do these big things. And in reality, part of what we provide with these opportunities for the students isn't just something to put on their resume, but rather skills that are going to assist them in life.
Sure.
Like that.
We don't just throw them in the deep end, so to speak, and say, either you can swim or you can't. What we're doing is we're saying, you can achieve the highest level that you want if you're willing to do the work. And then we will share with you the tips, the techniques, and frankly, we'll just help you iterate, your ugly potential abstract until it gets to a place where it's looking a lot better. So, when we first started some years ago, we were at one place, and frankly, when I started at this school in Palm Beach Gardens, the board that hired me, the head of school that hired me, they were willing to take a risk on, can we build a satellite? And we did exactly that. First middle school in the country to build a satellite. And now we are in the unique position because, as you know, management changes, boards change, but now we are located, our face-to-face meetings are in Tequesta, and we're working at another school, with another school, the Harvey Academy, as we are launching the Aerospace and Innovation Academy.
Well, I think it's just a reminder, right? Just like with COVID, you can choose to sit there and say, this is horrible, and now all those great things I wanted to do are done. But people pivot, the students pivot, we pivot, so we continue to take this blue sky philosophy to the next level, and it's okay when chapters close because you're on to another chapter. And so for me, I get excited because I just think this is exactly what we wanted to do when we started this podcast all that time ago.
I want to encourage any educators that might be listening. If you have something that you're very passionate about, that is the area that potentially you could have your own company in. So I always encourage the students, science fair, you should start with some topic you're interested in. For educators, if you really want to make a difference on the inside or the outside, you can be something called an entrepreneur, where your job is to improve the environment that you find yourself within your school, or you may choose to create your own brand, your own company. As an entrepreneur, either way.
Edupreneur now, that is the term now.
Absolutely. We stand ready to support you. And frankly, we're looking for more like-minded zealots that want to run with the other cheetahs like we want to do.
And so obviously, if you're looking to reach out to us, there are several ways to do so. You can follow us on Facebook at Go2Space. That's GO, the number 2 space. We'll also have that link in the description area. Of course, the website that Kevin mentioned earlier, www.aerospace.org.
Aerospace,
High.
H-I-G-H.
Did I forget to spell the H-I-G-H part? Aerospacehigh.org. So again, all those links will be available for there. But we hope that if you're continuing to listen to us, that it's because you are looking to join us as we say, let's go to space.